Imagine that you are in the Viking Age, in the cold, harsh lands of Scandinavia, where the seas were their playground and plunder became a way of life. In that world, where warriors walked proudly and their axes shone under the sun, there is a dark side that we often forget. Yes, I'm talking about how these brave but cruel people were often ruthless to their own families. Imagine, for example, a Viking woman struggling to survive in a world where she is not recognized as having the slightest value. Her fate was tied to her husband, a warrior who often went on raids. While he was out conquering new territories and bringing wealth, she was in charge of the housework, childcare, and home maintenance. Her destiny was to be subordinate, without the right to vote, without the possibility of choosing. And when he returned, he would often bring not only treasure, but also fear. His cruelty knew no bounds. The woman who was once proud was now just a shadow, afraid of his anger, of his unpredictable reactions. If something was against him, no matter how small, he could punish her in a way that would shock us today. His hand was the law, and she was only an object, a means to satisfy his needs. Children were also victims of this cruel system. Learning from their fathers, they often watched how their parents treated women. Arguments between parents were every day, and violence became normal. Adults grew up with the belief that such behavior was acceptable, that male dominance was something that could not be questioned. Their mothers were quiet, often frightened, and the children learned that strength lies in brutality, not in love or respect. Now imagine how these children, growing up, face their own emotions. Many of them have never learned how to love, how to show tenderness. Their hearts were closed, and their minds filled with memories of violence and fear. They became warriors like their fathers, but there was emptiness in them. Although they conquered new lands, their hearts were lost. And what about those women? They often gathered in silence, sharing their stories, their pain. In those moments when they gathered, they felt more powerful. Although they were subject to violence, in those moments they found strength in each other. They talked about their dreams, about how they would like their children to grow up in a world where they would be respected, where they would have the right to vote. But the reality was different. When their husbands came home, all hope would be dashed. Their thoughts were filled with fear. How will they welcome him? Will he be angry? Will he hit her? Every day was a struggle. The fight for survival, the fight for dignity. And while the Vikings were conquering new kingdoms, their homes were crumbling. The secret strength of women was in their endurance. Although they were subjected to violence, they were often the ones that held communities together. They were guardians of traditions, guardians of the fire. Their hearts were filled with strength that they often hid, but which manifested through their love for children. Now imagine what the future of those women would look like. Their children, growing up in a world where they learned that violence is normal, became the new warriors. But among them, perhaps there were those who remembered those moments when their mothers gathered, when they shared their dreams. Perhaps some of them were wondering, is this really all we have? And so, while the Vikings plundered and conquered, their children carried the burden of the past, the burden of violence, the burden of cruelty. And while their fathers celebrated their victories, their hearts were filled with sorrow. In that world, where respect and love seemed like a distant dream, there was hope. He hopes that one day, generations later, those who will break that cycle will appear. Those who will understand that strength does not lie in violence, but in love and respect. And so, while we think about the Viking past, about their cruelty, let's also remember those women, those children. Their stories are also important, because they taught us that true strength lies in love, not fear. Perhaps it will teach us to face our own demons, to break the chain of violence and create a world where respect will be the norm, not the exception. Therefore, let's listen to these stories, learn from them, and let them inspire us to be better. Because in the end, real strength is not in axes and looting, but in the love and respect we can give each other.